series will be Yasha Kahn with multi-state cannabis testing data analysis.
Yay!
Thank you, everyone. So as Mike said, multi-state cannabis testing data analysis. First, who I am and why I'm doing this. For the last 10 years, I've been in cannabis testing across 4 different markets, 4 different states. And I have been responsible for data in one way or another for most of this time. But especially the last year and a half, when the needs of cannabis testing were to understand what is happening in the industry within cannabis testing. Why does data look the way it does? And I think a lot of labs, every lab in the industry, most growers in the industry have seen that there's some sort of strange things happening with testing data across the country and in most states. So through a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests, we gathered data sets from multiple states. And there was one state that already had open data available. We put the data together, and together it's across 5 states, 80 labs, over a number of years, and has almost 600,000 flower samples. So it's a whole lot of data, and there's a lot within this data set. All of the data is now openly available to everyone since it has been made publicly available through FOIA. And all of the analysis that I'm going to share with you is done in something called Jupyter Notebook, which has all the code, the analysis, the summaries, the narration all in one place, so that if you disagree with this analysis, then you can take the code yourself, use different assumptions, and do with it as you please. So once we get the data, different states have different regulations. So we need to normalize the data across different states. And the first step is to clean the data. Sometimes there's a flower with over 3,000% THC written in the data set, so we get rid of those. Then we normalize across the different regulations, and we pick the formula THC plus 87% of THCA, which is max THC, and we moisture adjust it. Some states prohibit moisture adjustment, some mandate it. Some states force total THC, which is THC plus THCA, others have max THC, but we wanted to make sure that we can compare all labs and all results across the country. Once we did that, we have this huge data set. And before we can answer and look at a lot of the questions that all of us are curious about, terpenes, cannabinoids, etc., we need to understand the integrity of the data. Can all of the data be trusted, or are there aspects of it that should not be? Some early takeaways. There's some truths that we're going to see today, and everyone with the data can confirm. The shape of THC data, when reported as a histogram, shows a normal distribution. It's a bell curve. And there's some really cool, interesting anomalies. And there's a true average, as in, if you take out the extreme outliers that are relatively easy to identify, most labs have pretty much the same average potency. So first, what is normal distribution? If you take the height of all of the fully grown birch trees in the world, or adult men in the US, shoe sizes or newborn baby weights, you're going to see something that looks like this. It's a bell curve with most of the results being somewhere in the middle, and then fewer as you go away from the center. We see this in almost all of the cannabis testing labs across the country. I keep clicking, but I'm going to show just a couple examples of this is what we see every year for almost every lab in every state. And then the question is, what is not normal? Again, men's height. The average male in the US, fully grown male, is 5'9". Few guys are over 6'5", and few are under 5'2". Sometimes there's data manipulation. And here's an example of self-reported men's heights. The data says more than enough which should show a normal distribution, but we see 2 things here. The clearest one that comes to mind is men that are 5'11" may say, no, no, I'm 6 foot tall. And another one is that everything is moved over by 1 inch to the right. A pretty recent study, but from a couple of years ago, I don't think anything has changed since. 49% of women use height as a filter on dating websites. So we know that there's an incentive for men to sometimes exaggerate their height. In cannabis, there are also incentives, and we know what they are. They're association of amount of THC to price. Flowers under 20% typically don't sell, and the more THC there's in the product, the higher it can be sold for, and the faster it can sell. Knowing that, let's take a look at some histograms of labs that are aware of this pricing scheme. This lab, I assume, has a motto internally: do not report anything under 20%. If you get to 25%, please do. But this is only one lab in one state. Another lab in another state, this one has a histogram middle finger. It has, do not report anything under 20%. If you get to 25, please do. If you get to 30, that would be ideal. And another lab in another state has exactly the same theme. If products are under 20%, they don't sell. And growers tell labs, we will leave you if you don't do this. Subjectively, I think, I see that there's a discontinuity in all of these, that there's something happening at 20%. And you might see the same. But the good thing is we don't have to just squint and try to see it. There are data forensics tools that are used in courts, they're used in financial fraud cases, they have been used in academic papers for cannabis, and they are applied to data sets that should have a normal distribution and applied to them where you see the point of discontinuity. They answer the question, could this have occurred through randomness, or is it more likely that there is data manipulation? And they all result in, yes, there is a need to take a closer look because this looks like data manipulation. Such labs are found in every state. And with these labs, with the samples that they get, they don't necessarily inflate the potency of every sample. They take the samples that do not fit the narrative of need to be over 20%, and they seem to manipulate those. The way that they can do this, from most expensive to least expensive approach. Most expensive is you test the product and you get a result that doesn't fit what's needed. You test it again and test it again and again and again. That takes way too long, it's too expensive in terms of materials and time. Easier is to manipulate the second test. You know that it's at 14 instead of 20. Write down the exact words, knowing that you need to manipulate by a certain percentage. Or use the, by patent correctly. Even less expensive is manipulate the result of the first test. You see it's at 18%, rank 21.1. And this labs have been caught doing this, labs have been fined for doing this. And the least expensive, and labs have also been caught for doing this, is dry lab. What's the point of even testing if you're going to fake the numbers? Might as well just write the numbers that are being requested. So that was discontinuities. Those kinds of discontinuities are rare. They appear in every state, but they are really rare within the data set. But what happens with labs that have normal looking distributions, but are inflated potency? How can we see this? How do they compare to other labs? So for the most part, labs can really be divided into 3 groups. We already showed with major discontinuities, those that have an average max THC of around 19.5 to 21%, and those that have over 24%. As in, on this slide, what we see is 2 kinds. Here they are grouped together. The one on top is those that have around 21% max THC, and the one at the bottom is over 24% max THC. When we try to align them, they don't align, and we see that it looks like 2 different data sets. And we need to figure out what do they do and how can we really calculate what is happening. Is there an actual statistical difference? Or could it be that different products are just sent to the different labs? Could it be that the labs in red receive the best products and the labs in green receive the worst products? With a data set of this size, in most states, what we can do is identify growers that have sent the same samples to multiple labs on both sides. We know that it's the same samples because they have the same names and they're sent around the same time. From that, we get two different data sets, one that's the green, one that's the red, and we run something called the student's t-test, which is a statistical tool with which we can ask the question, could these two different data sets have been created through randomness, or is there something else that's happening? And we know that the products are the same. So the conclusion is that since randomness could not have caused such a difference, the conclusion is that the approach to measurement is what's different. To bring it back to the men's heights example, if let's say you're a man that's 5'9", and a clinic pulls up to town and says, hey, test your height with me, and tells this man that's 5'9", I'm gonna measure you, you're 6'10" now. I don't think people are gonna believe that guy that's saying it. We know it's not true. I don't want to say which of the labs is manipulating data, which one isn't, but both can't be right. And we also know what the incentives are. Labs with systematic inflation are found in every state, and the approach to this kind of manipulation, this is both seen in the data, but also in the case documents for the labs that have been closed for this, is systematic manipulation, where they take the same kind of approach for all samples. This can be done by everyone in the lab that is aware of it. An example is when testing flowers. Instead of homogenizing the flower, you get as many trichomes in there as you can into the weight load. Or most egregious is you take a sample into a container, you shake it up, whatever falls off is what you test. And you will get significantly higher potency by doing so for every sample. And a lone wolf approach in which a single person in the lab knows that this is happening. This can happen by manipulating the instruments or the calculations. So far I've spoken about labs, what happens at labs, but what does this kind of manipulation do to entire markets? These are 4 states, A through D, and each one of these plots shows potency, averages, and range for each of the years where we have the data. We see growth in potency every year, and that's expected. That's expected because growers know that flowers under 20% don't sell, so they're going to stop investing in those. And growers are likely getting better. But what we're really seeing in the data, the real reason for this kind of growth, is that the labs that offer higher potency get more business. And here you can see, as a grower, these are all the tests performed in Massachusetts by a single grower throughout 1 year. As they transition from one lab to another, their potency increases by over 25%. It happens overnight as they switch labs. And for the grower, this is excellent. It's much easier to sell 24.8% wheat than it is 19.4% wheat. And so with the market, the labs that provide higher potency, they get an increased market share. And the ones that don't provide higher potency, they decrease the market share. And there's an endpoint to this. What happens when this continues for years? And across every state we're seeing this, but some states are in a worse position than others. Here's a state that only has 3 labs left. The top left lab, I already shared. This one has major discontinuities. The top right also has a pretty major discontinuity. And the bottom one has a nice bell curve. The top 2 have a 26% average THC, which is around 17% inflated. and the bottom one has even higher potency than those with discontinuities. This state does not have a single honest lab left. And for regulators at this point, it's much harder to fix this problem. They can't shut down labs, because then they shut down the market. There are solutions, but this is a nightmare scenario for regulators. Every state has dishonest labs, and when a single lab shows up and offers to a single grower such excellent service or such impossible results, every other grower in the state, in order to compete, needs to make the decision: do we go out of business or do we inflate? And every lab has to do the same thing. Every time that a grower comes to a lab and says, but that other lab is offering me higher potency or lower failure rates, the lab has to decide: do we start to do this, start to inflate potency, or do we go out of business? And over the last month, I know of 2 labs, honest labs. Through the data, you can see that they're honest. They have gone out of business. I think yesterday I read about PSI Labs in Michigan. And as you saw, there are states without a single honest lab left. Why is this important? So first, consumer protection violations. I estimate that between $1 and $2 billion worth of mislabeled flour is sold per month across the US. And flour is just the first product that's made, because from mislabeled products, someone has to make concentrates, and from that they make edibles. And if you start with a mislabeled product, it's likely that everything's going to be mislabeled after that. If ExxonMobil was watering down their gas by 20%, we would all hear about it, and every attorney general would speak up, and they would get the animated dollar signs in their eyes, because that is a consumer protection violation. Next is research. The US has had more or less legal regulated cannabis for 10 years. A lot of research has been done. But what if all of that research, if it was done on using label claims, for example, clinical research, what if all of that research has to be discarded because it's based on bad data? As an example, there are labs that inflate THC that almost never show any other cannabinoids, unlike almost every other lab. So if the data can't be trusted when it comes into a study, then the results of the study should not be trusted either. And most importantly, it's dangerous for consumers, workers, patients. Patients can't dose properly. Consumers can't predict the effect of cannabis products. Let's say you like to smoke a joint every night, and you buy a joint and you really like it. It's labeled as 35%, but it's actually 20. And you smoke it every day. You go about and you do your activities. Make the decision once you're comfortable with that high that you have. You drive and do your errands. But then one day you get a joint that's labeled as 35%, but it's actually 35% accurately labeled. You're going to be much higher than you predicted you would be. That's dangerous for you, that's dangerous for the family coming back from vacation. And although I don't have enough time and it's not here, the safety screens, the manipulation that's happening there is at least as bad as what I showed, but I think multiple times worse. And anyone interested in taking a look at what safety screen manipulation looks like in Massachusetts, please visit my poster, my table, and I'll show everything that's happening in Massachusetts. But knowing that safety screens are being manipulated, this again speaks to what about the research that's happening? What about clinical research that shows that something is not working? Maybe it's because there's pesticides or mold or whatever else. Until this problem is fixed, we're kind of, what's the point of some of the clinical research or label claims-based research? What's the point of doing it at all? But labs have been closed for doing this. They have been caught. They've been caught through data. They've been caught through off-the-shelf testing programs. There are excellent data tools that can identify what within the lab needs to be looked at and likely how to audit it, what to find. And the things that have worked in other states. Open data. Washington State had open data for all of their testing. And a cannabis data scientist named Jim McCrae reported about it annoyingly for years until reporters started to notice, start to ask questions of the regulators. And then the regulators closed down a bunch of labs in Washington. In Nevada, a group of data scientists, including Jim McCrae, got a hold of their testing data. And the same thing happened. Multiple labs got closed for exactly what I had been shown. Soon after that, both of those states took down their open data. Because open data is a window, it can show everyone, is the market actually being regulated? Should be trusted or not? And so I am very much for open data and believe open data is a clear, necessary and free first step for every state to deal with this. Second is off-the-shelf testing. Being able to see what I showed, this is like looking at the forest. It shows generally the problem. But I can't necessarily say in one product this is manipulated. Off-the-shelf testing takes products, tests them, ideally at multiple labs, and Jeff Rawson has done this wonderfully at the Institute of Cannabis Science, where it's a demonstration of does the label match the actual product. And if you can imagine, this is what the market looks like from the data. Here's the specifics of these products that do not match what's on the label. This is what leads regulators to have to take action. Otherwise, they don't. And lastly, it is whenever products are found to be mislabeled, especially when it's systematic, product recalls are necessary. This is for products to then be relabeled correctly, and for growers to have to take into account when selecting what lab to use, the risk of having product recalls. All of this could not have been possible without the inspiration of folks that did this before me, without the current support of Jamie, Jim, Jeff, Keegan, Ruth, Kyle, and a huge and awesome thank you to everyone at MCR Labs.
Thank you so much, Yasha. Time for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will bring you back.
Hi, Matthias. I work at GOI Labs in the lab, and I love the way your presentation got better as it got. I was even more intrigued as it went along, so I might have missed it at the beginning. If most states don't have an open data policy, how was it that you compiled all your data?
So first, thank you for the feedback. I'll try to be more exciting from the start. So Jamie Toth did a Freedom of Information Act request in Oregon, from what I understand, and that demonstrated to me that this could be done through Freedom of Information Act requests. So I sent Freedom of Information Act requests to somewhere between 1 and 2 dozen states. Almost all of them said no right away, and maybe half of those had real legal reasons why not. It's in their laws to not share that kind of data. And the other ones, after a little bit of convincing, they shared that data.
That's awesome.
Any other questions?
Are the numbers that you showed, how much of the test results are relative to oils produced from the flower, or is it all flower?
So I said a number at the very beginning, that was just under 600,000. That was only flower, and all of the analysis that's here is only for flower. There is data on everything else, but I have to start somewhere.
Thank you. Fantastic presentation. So I guess somebody has to ask the big question. The new CCC memorandum, I believe it is technically, want to make myself sound stupid and explain, so how will it affect anything? I don't believe it's a silver bullet, but I'd like to hear from you, and also what other, if we're probably gonna see more, what else do you expect, and what else could be helpful from the CCC, directive-wise?
I think that note started and ended with something along the lines of, this is the first in a series.
Yeah.
That was the first time that that the CCC has ever stated anything with any kind of direction on what is to be reported by labs, which is excellent. It's the necessary first step. And I'm very much looking forward to what else they're gonna say. And it's, they can't say everything all at once, I'm sure. They need to have discussions, they need to meet with people. And I hope that this was the first step towards what's needed. However, that bulletin was only a suggestion. And if a single lab in the state does not follow it, the suggestion, but every other lab does, then that single lab is gonna have a 25% higher THC reporting than everyone else. Because you get 13% from the decarboxylation of THC in that formula, plus moisture adjustment of around 10%. So knowing that at least one other lab will not do this, no lab can do this. And every lab I assume every honest lab wants the CCC to say very directly, this will be enforced, and this is law. And this is mandatory on this date. At which point, this action will take we will get what we need from this specific wording, and I'm hopeful that it continues, that there's more things like this, but also investigations. We can't just say, okay, starting now, everyone has to be honest. We need to take a look at what about all the other products that are available on shelves today. Should those be relabeled if they're inaccurately labeled? What if we see that there's a lab, and please do this at me on the table, that a couple of years ago found, under 2%, they had lower than 2% fail rate for mold, while every other state and almost every lab in the country has a 15% fail rate for mold. Something needs to be done so that there will always be cheaters, but there needs to be some sort of repercussions to doing so.
What's in that bulletin, is that, are the other states that you studied, do they already have that well defined? Did that stop inflation in those states?
There is no state that does not have that well defined, other than Massachusetts, out of the states that I've studied.
Okay, so that.
Every state has a formula that's written, mandated. Just something really interesting, really quick, sorry. I hope you guys find this as cool as I do. In this state, they have a regulation, it has to be moisture adjusted, and the formula is max THC. In this state, you're not allowed to moisture adjust, it has to be max THC. This one is moisture adjusted, THCA. Different formulas in every state, and the cannabis that arrives at these labs has read the regulations and knows where to be to meet the 20% mark. So all of them have very set regulations, and we can see that in their data, plus the regulations and the speaking to regulators.
Hi, I'm Anthony Goodson, a consumer. I'm wondering, how much does it cost to find the THC in one sample?
Different labs have different prices, but probably somewhere between 40 and $100.
So it's not really a realistic thing for just your average consumer to go out and what kind of testing machines would you have to have? I imagine there's different types of testing.
So that there's, if you're just a consumer, then what I believe you should be able to do is trust the labels. That's the problem. And there are devices online, they're around $20,000 a piece that individuals or growers can purchase, where you can do this for yourself, or you can set up a lab. If you want, you can get everything accredited, hire scientists and get it that way. Or around $50 to walk into a lab and get tested, but that's more than the price of the product that you're testing. So what we need is a fix to the problem so that you can trust the labels and not have to go get it independently verified. But I do know that some scientists that are doing clinical research right now do test their own products knowing about this problem. So they have to connect with a lab that they, for some reason, identify as trustworthy to do this kind of testing.
Another one was here.
Thank you for this analysis, really impressive. You stressed the big cutoff at 20% for THC. You also mentioned the mold rate being something that you've seen. Are there any other metrics that you've seen a very distinct like discontinuity in, and what effects does that have on the consumer market and the success of that lab?
THC is responsible for the price of the product, and mold accounts for, in other than California, in the states listed, in all states that have a 10%, in all states that have a 10,000 CFU per gram limit for mold, just like Massachusetts, it accounts for around 95% of all fails, so mold does. So mold and potency are the two tests that are the biggest influencer of value. Either you have to discard the product or remediate it with the mold results, and with the potency, it determines the price. Everything else, let's say all the heavy metals together account for less than 1% of the failures. Pesticides significantly lower than that. So it's harder to catch manipulation at such low numbers. And also the risk of doing science that an auditor, bad science that an auditor may catch, that doesn't drive you business, is also less likely than what we see here. So we do see, so example in Washington, they don't have total mold testing, but they do have specific pathogens that are tested for. We do see the sharp line for a couple of labs at the action limit. There's one state for which we have one of the heavy metals that has a beautiful curve, exponential curve, and a nice little uptick right before the action limit, nothing after. So there's elements of it, but these are the big drivers of markets.
All right, one more question.
Hi, thank you. Do you think there's any opportunity for growers to sort of educate the market in terms of terpenes and all these other factors that go into cannabis products versus just like the unit price to consumers? Is there any opportunity for that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think you should. You're better off doing that than sticking to THC. I know in the vape, the biggest companies that make vapes, they say to make the first sale, THC sells that first sale. But people keep coming back because of the terpenes, because of the quality of the product. So keeping your clients happy with actually good product is a good long-term solution, especially if what's happening here gets louder, and those growers that are basing everything on, manipulated data, if you can differentiate yourself by not doing so and by focusing on, we have all the terpenes, we have all these other cannabinoids, the entourage effect, the freshness of the products. I think it's the right long game, especially with my biased hope that this becomes loud and this problem goes away.
One more quick question.
Assuming that the tests are standardized, would it ever be possible to have each product tested by 2 independent labs, and then that way you can kind of find out the outliers, or that would be a situation where, hey, this one's always coming in way over or whatever?
So there are, again, about Jeff Rossman, who runs the Institute of Cannabis Science. I think what they are doing is something very similar to that, in that they can test products at multiple labs and really answer this question. But to burden growers with the price of additional testing, I think what's the better solution is for regulators to make sure that there is no data manipulation, so that this would not have to happen on a per sample, for every sample, but randomly selected samples, so that every time that a grower or a lab has manipulated the results of a sample, they have a hard time sleeping at night knowing that what if that sample gets selected for this kind of random test.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Let's give Yasha one more round of applause.